Welcome. My name is Bob Schutz. I'm the founder of the John Paul II Healing Center. And I want to talk to you about overcoming the wounds of fear. And as we've just come through these months and over a year of the pandemic, I believe that the pandemic of fear has been even as damaging as the sickness and death that we've experienced. It's that fear of sickness and the fear of death, the fear of suffering, the fear of loss, and the fear of so many other things that have come to the surface in that. And as I ponder this, I think about early on going for a morning walk. I was just a beautiful cold day and was walking up the street in my neighborhood and praying the rosary. Had a tremendous amount of peace in my heart. And in the middle of that, it was interrupted by a neighbor coming up, and I could see in his face this intensity of fear and saw it in his eyes. It was just gripping him. And he said to me, "Have you bought 6 months worth of groceries yet?" And I said, "What?" I really hadn't known much about what was happening. And he said, "Haven't you heard? There's going to be millions of people who are dying from this COVID-19, and we're going to run out of groceries, and uh, we're not going to have enough food." And he was just going on and on. And I was just taken aback, but admittedly, without knowing it, something in his words and his emotion and his eyes, I took in his fear. And as I was continuing to walk after our conversation, I was asking the Lord, why this fear? What am I afraid of? And though it may seem obvious, I became aware of my fear of death and the fear of suffering and the fear of loss of the people that I love and the fear of the unknown. And I think many of us shared in those same kinds of experiences. As I pondered that, I thought also about the really beautiful experiences I've had with my brother's death many years ago and the dying process of my father and my wife, Margie, over 4 years ago. And what really changed those experiences for me was a real act of faith and trust in God. And I remember as my wife was dying, rereading a passage from Father Jacques Philippe, his book Interior Freedom. And in the book, in this section, he's talking about it's not so much our suffering that harms us, it's the fear of suffering. He says the fear of suffering causes us to pull back and to get into control and to harden our hearts and to isolate and withdraw. And he said that's what really damages us. And we've seen that in this pandemic. He says, but what suffering does, if we'll enter into it with faith, is it opens our heart. It expands our capacity to love. And I truly experienced that. His words really rang true as I walked through my father's dying process and my wife Margie's dying process and thought back to my brother Dave's dying process. And in that process, really trusting that there was an end to this, that it wasn't going to go on forever, and that we could say goodbye and we'd be reunited, and that there really was a resurrection. And as I think about all this, I think also about Jesus' words as he was on the point of death. And he could see the fear and feel the fear in his disciples. And he spoke to them. He said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. You have faith in God. Have faith also in me." Really, it sounds simplistic, but this is the antidote to our fear. This is what we see in all the great saints, like Saint Damien, who was not afraid of getting leprosy, but walked in the midst of these lepers and cared for them. We see this with Jesus. When he walked up to the lepers, we walked to the people who were the outcasts, and he healed them because he wasn't afraid. He had a trust in his Father. For all of us, I think if we're going to overcome the pandemic of fear, we need to step into a new level of faith, a new level of trust, trusting that there's something beyond death, and on this side of death, love and community is what keeps us alive, really alive in our hearts. So I want to invite all of us as a church to be a witness of this trust, and so that we can no longer be afraid of death, but trust in the goodness of God and in the healing power of his love. For as St. John says, it's his perfect love that drives out our fear. God bless you.